Hey, it's Nicole from Outer Inner Space, and in this video we're talking about the second house, 8th house axis, covering themes of self-esteem, self-worth, unique talents, money-making potentials, magnetism, your values, psychic awareness, fears, and the alchemical process of transmuting them, and how this is all linked together. I feel like it's important to talk about this because in my line of work I see so many people struggling and suffering because they base their self-worth and self-esteem and sense of value on the feedback that they get from the outside world, from the reflections of others, and that results in a lot of damage to the psyche and an inability to magnetize matches into their experiences. So I hope this video helps you see the importance of getting your second house in order before anything else. And the process of doing that makes you more resilient and compassionate towards yourself, which then reverberates out to others, and also more aware of your special skills and talents that you have to offer the world. Because we're all born with innate skills, and through conditioning and education and other people's expectations, layers of shame kind of cloud those skills, and we're taught to suppress our authenticity. So I believe that the second house can really help you just tune into what your values are, and from that, all that conditioning and the layers of shame can fall away, and you can just return back to who you've always been, but without that extra junk. So, like I said, the second house governs themes of self-worth, self-esteem, your values, and what you have to offer the world in terms of value. And those are the special skills and practical talents that are basically embedded in you as a physical being. So if you think about the first house being your physical manifestation incarnate here in the world, then your second house is like your foundation and what you naturally have to offer, that earth element, so it's your natural contribution. And that is even before the idea of thought. You don't have to think about this kind of stuff, like it's innate within you. That thought part comes into the third house, but the natural skills and talents and abilities and stuff is already innate within your being, and it's something that comes very natural to you. So it's how you use your body essentially in the world practically in order to offer service, in a sense, offer those special skills in exchange for your needs and getting, those foundational needs of shelter and food and stuff to create that feedback loop. And that's where the 8th house axis comes into play. And so the second house is ruled by Venus. As standard, your own second house will have its own chart rulers, but just keeping in mind that there's that Venusian energy of creative, free-flowing energy of, nurturing yourself. And when you take care of yourself, then you are able to function in a very organic and natural way in the world. And it becomes less about force and more about, that balance of masculine and feminine, where it's like creating and then allowing, and creating and allowing that white space between the action in order to create a healthy energetic flow. And so the 8th house is that magnetism and being able to see the result, that return on the investment. So the 8th house is about money that comes from others, money that you pay in taxes. It's about that energy exchange between the people that you love. If you consider how the 8th house comes after the 7th house, which is where we have those interactions with other people out in the world, the 8th house is where you develop that intimacy. You offer those deeper parts of you, and that creates the trust and the bond, and that's that 8th house energy of the exchange of energy. It also has to do with karma and alchemy and your psychic gifts. For example, if you consider the second house and Taurus energy being about the 5 senses and what you see here in the practical world, there comes a point, and it's usually after, those experiences of pain that we carry, and we're kind of like questioning the scope of reality in a way. And so that comes in like with that mysticism part where we kind of start feeling like there's something more, and that's when we start paying attention to our intuition and accessing these deeper faculties, our extrasensory perception, and that's eighth house energy. And so that's where this axis comes into play, in that sense of like going beyond the physical senses and into these deeper trenches of our soul and of our psyche, and how that's connected to our fears. And usually these fears come as a result of your interactions with others, so it comes after the seventh house and opposes our second house of our authentic gifts and our innate abilities. And that feedback that we get from others, if our second house isn't in order, it affects our spirit. And some of the deepest fears come from those times in our development when we were young, when we had to suppress that natural part of us, our special skills, our unique abilities, because it was either inconvenient or our parents didn't know how to recognize or nurture them, these kinds of things. And I'm absolutely not saying that that's anybody's fault, because it's not. Like, where we can only do what we have experienced in our own upbringing, so it's like this generational cycle. So recognizing it, though, is your ability to start working backwards and unraveling it and neutralizing it, essentially. It's just about recognizing that fears can really play a huge role in our self-esteem, and therefore our ability to attract what we deserve just naturally, because we're here. And so the eighth house is about going into those fears and actually facing that trauma and those unproductive and unhealthy and really damaging thought patterns that are ingrained in us, you know, by authorities or society, and having the courage to face them. So the eighth house is ruled by Mars and Pluto, and I did a chart ruler series, and it's really worth watching the Scorpio ascendant one, because I talk about how the energy of eighth house has to do with alchemizing fears, and how you can use eighth house energy, Scorpio energy, to transmute them and come out stronger because of it, because this is all just extra stuff that comes from our experiences in the world and from not knowing ourselves. And that's so normal, especially in the Western world, not knowing ourselves, because from the youngest age we're taught that our happiness is something to acquire, it's something that comes from outside of us, and that we need to do certain things in order to be happy or act a certain way to be recognized as valuable. But there's ways to get past it, and that's why the ninth house follows, because then we seek out what is actually true, what is actually us, what is meaningful, and then the ninth house opposing the third house is challenging those beliefs that happen when we're young. So this is why I love astrology so much, because it is all encompassing, and you're never just working with one house or one aspect or one placement. Like, it's very multi-dimensional. But what this video is focusing on is really tuning into those second house qualities and those values, and bringing that power back to you, to what's true for you, and, you know, working on evening the ratio between the focus on the feedback of others to define you, and coming into more of a practice of direct perception of your own experience and your own inner world. So if you look at the natal chart, the bottom half is your inner world and your inner development, and then the top half is how that is expressed out into the world and how it all comes together. So if you are experiencing any kind of dysfunction in your life in terms of money-making ability, limiting beliefs about being able to attract in what you want, the ability to give and receive love, or self-worth or self-esteem issues, or an inability to be authentic or express yourself authentically and being able to truly value yourself, then I really encourage you to have a look at this second house energy. And I've created an article, it's like an instruction really, that you can do yourself, which just gives you some ideas of how to explore that for yourself. And it is something that is really worthwhile doing, like, on your own and in your own energy, because you know you best. So this is about kind of bringing the power back into you and refining your experience at the beginning, letting go of all that extra stuff, that the outside voices, and kind of doing somewhat of a reset in order to recalibrate yourself back to you. It's not like you have to gain anything new, it's all there, it's just covered up. And so that's where that Venus energy comes into play, because there is a level of compassion required for this kind of inquiry, and perhaps it's likely that you haven't given yourself that level of compassion or held the space for you to explore these ideas. And it's very natural that that might be the case, because like I said before, from basically the moment we're born, we're tweaked in order to create ourselves based on the feedback of others. But turning that around and seeing it from the inner perspective is also required in order to get rid of that conditioning and see past those limitations and those fears that aren't even yours in the first place. And these fears linger, and they're so pervasive because they are in such discord with what is actually your true authentic frequency. And that's why they keep coming up again and again, because your soul wants you to recognize them and clear them so that you can come back to your authenticity and begin to offer the world that second house energy of your innate abilities and your skills and your talents and your offerings and your service. So I guess this is a PSA to kind of, instead of focusing on that outer validation and the words of others, the feedback of others to determine your value, bring it back to you and start there. And that might be requiring you to put up some energetic shields or distancing yourself temporarily just to recalibrate. But you might have already had the experience where you give that love, that Venus energy to others, that natural love energy to others, and it wasn't seen or valued. That's this axis. And it hurt terribly. That's the 8th house, and there goes your power. It's been given away, so it's about calling it back. That's the same for money, and if you're working in something that doesn't feed you energetically, there are natural limitations about the kind of return that you get back, and that might be because of conditioning about the kind of job that you should be in, or the kind of, pre-established roles that exist in society. Whenever we're trying to fit into a mold that has been determined by someone outside of us and it doesn't naturally fit for us, our 2nd and 8th house axis is a vibrational mismatch. That also goes for how you see your financial situation. So if you're in debt and that's taking a toll on your self-esteem, your value, your self-worth, your level of confidence, then there's a mismatch there, because you're making your value and your worth dependent on your bank balance, which is outside of you. And it can feel all-encompassing, but it's about recognizing that inner value versus the outer perceptions of what things are supposed to be. And I did a video on reframing debt, and I'll link that below if you're interested. But essentially, this is all about bringing the energy back to that 2nd house, where we determine our values ourselves, completely for ourselves, because this is all very, like I said before, it's all very natural within us. It's literally like ingrained in our body, but again, it's just covered up with all that extra stuff. And with that, in terms of the body, and how I said how the 1st house is like your physical incarnation here, and the 2nd house is the value of that incarnation. If you're giving your sacral energy away, your creative energy, your sexual energy, in a way that doesn't replenish naturally, like this energetic feedback loop, then there's going to be a real negative emphasis on those 8th house fears and the pain, because the foundation hasn't been established first. And so that's where the 8th house gets that reputation of this black hole of depression and fear, and that low vibration of Scorpio energy. And I say this with respect because I have a stellium in Scorpio. But like, I know it, and it's because that foundation, that 2nd house, those values aren't established. So of course, if the foundation just look at it on the chart, like it's underneath it. Like, of course, if that foundation isn't established, there's nothing to, put your feet on or gain traction to, so you sink. And that's 8th house vibes. So if you've ever had a sexual encounter and you felt depleted afterwards, it's because your subconscious knows that you're selling yourself short and that there's no energetic return on the investment of your time, of your sacral energy, of your energy in general. This kind of action is going to hurt you. Or if you've put a lot of energy into a creative project and it hasn't been received, then there's a mismatch there. It doesn't mean it can't be received later, but you kind of need to tune into the value and then look back on the project and be like, this is worth something, this is a really valuable offering. And then when you tune that vibration, that 2nd house worth, the values, the natural skills that you have to offer, then you start to see a result in the outer world. This is the same for the food you eat. When you think of 2nd house and Venusian energy, if you're putting in low vibrational food, or if you're numbing your 5 senses like with drugs and alcohol, then you're again creating that mismatch between the 8th house. And I'm not saying that any of that is bad, but if it is undermining your value and what you have to offer the world to a point where you can't even access those abilities, then you aren't valuing yourself enough, and that translates into the outer world. When they're working in harmony, that's when your abundance grows, that's when your self-confidence grows, that's when you attract in incredible intimate relationships, and that's when you're able to transmute the fears and do the alchemy, because you're synthesizing the axis, you're moving the energy, and it's not stuck, and it's not in that black hole, but it's you're in, you're out, you grow a little in self-esteem, and then you have more strength to face the next fear. And it's like this infinity symbol of energy flowing, and that's the whole point of existence, is to allow the energy to flow and reach the higher level. That's the 9th house, and then the 10th house level of mastery, where you create the legacy. But like I said, it does require that self-compassion, that Venus energy, and it also requires that Taurian energy of being patient with the process, and it also requires that Scorpionic energy of being brave and being courageous and seeing fear for what it is, that it never belonged to you, it just got attached to you. But you are strong enough to build up your energy so that it has nowhere to hold on to. You build your vibration enough that it becomes a mismatch and it can't touch you. It's completely within your capacity to get past it. It might require a shedding of old skin, but the rebirth is assured. So the link to the 2nd house valuation is below. It's just an article, so you don't have to pay for it. And I'm going to leave this here, and I hope you found some value in this, and I am wishing you well.